Hello, everyone, and welcome back. It is Ian Sachs here. Now we are doing some sports talk. I am joined this afternoon. I guess I could say that now that it's 12 o'clock on the dot. I am joined by Marissa Tomsky. Marissa, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Oh, it is a pleasure having you today. And you know what? I know that you're a big hockey fan. Let's talk some hockey. I haven't done it on the air yet. I just wrote a column in the Ionian that came out yesterday about how now I'm a hockey fan, and well, I'm excited to get into it. The season started maybe about 2 weeks ago, and are already a great a ton of good games, and you know what? Let's jump right into it. Opening night game: San Jose Sharks, LA Kings. The Sharks beat the Kings on their ring ceremony night. As a Kings fan, that was a little disappointing. But the two of them are right now tied atop the Western Conference with each with 7 points. Marissa, what are we looking at with those teams out there?
Well, I mean, you know what? It's a big rivalry. You know, they're both in California. So I think you're always going to have that big game. And because they're tied with 7 points each, they're going to go back and forth all season. We saw it last season. We saw it the season before. We saw it in the playoffs. We're always going to see them going back and forth. You never know. Each team is always going to bring their A game, and I think we're just going to continue to see that rivalry.
I completely agree. You know, those two teams had an epic battle last year in the playoffs. The Kings coming back from down 3-1, I believe, to starve off elimination and move on their way to their second Stanley Cup in the last 3 years. But really, another team you have to look at out west would have to be the Chicago Blackhawks. 5 points so far this season, and the Blackhawks have just. The Blackhawks and the Kings Western Conference Finals, 7 games, an unbelievable matchup, and I think it's going to be those two teams right back there again this year in the matching up for the Western Conference Championship.
You know, I can agree with that. The Blackhawks are always a solid team. We saw them again last year in the playoffs. They always bring their A game. They're always on top. I feel like, you know, they're tied for with 5 points with Nashville and Dallas. You know, usually it's not that uncommon to see, like I said, San Jose and Los Angeles, they're tied for 7, but now we also have Chicago tied with two teams instead of one. So they're going to have to make sure that they stay on top of their game so they keep that top spot. You have 2 other teams that are competing with them now, and instead of battling out with one, now they're going to have to battle out with 2.
You know, that's a good point, but you also have to keep in mind it's early in the season. You know, the Predators and Blackhawks have only played 3 games so far, and still a long ways to go in the season. But now let's jump it over to the Eastern Conference. I know we have your New Jersey Devils there, sitting right now second place in the Metropolitan Division behind the New York Islanders. Look at them, 4-0, 8 points, tied for the Eastern Conference lead with Montreal. We'll get to the Canadiens in a little while, but Marissa, what's been the trick for the Islanders so far this season?
I'm going to start to talk about the Metropolitan Division as a whole right now, just because I feel like, as much as I love my Devils, they haven't had the best season the last couple of years. I mean, other than the Stanley Cup 2 years ago and losing to your LA Kings, I feel as if the New York Islanders and the New Jersey Devils aren't two teams that you would typically see at the top of the list. And I'm not being objective about that. I just feel based on a statistics point of view, that's not something that you're used to seeing. So I think for both teams, they brought in a lot of newcomers and they've changed their strategy a little bit. I know the Devils, up until last night, they lost to the Capitals by a decent amount, and I don't want to really recap it because I don't want to relive it.
Wasn't it 6-2? I think.
Oh, don't drive the knife.
Hey,
don't do it. Don't do it.
Wait, no. I'm trying to ease the pain a little bit. You guys were tied 2-2 after the first.
I mean, we were, yes, you were right. But once we got into the third period, we kind of just collapsed, and I'm not really sure what happened. And I think the Capitals kind of just stepped their game up, and we just couldn't keep up. The Capitals have always been a very solid team. You know, you have Ovechkin, you have pretty much every single one of their linesmen. They're all veterans. They know what to do. They play with each other all the time. We have a lot of new kids, as do the Islanders. But with that being said, we've also done well with those new kids. So now that they've had the opportunity to match up against these veterans, they're going to have to see what to do with it. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, there's just there's a learning curve with this team, I believe.
It almost seems like they're having their beginner's luck right now. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe you're saying it's like they're in that nice honeymoon period where, you know, you're just starting out and you're having success, and it's like, wow, this is really going well, and you're bracing yourself for when the season comes along a little more, because it is a long season, and you're bracing yourself for, you know, potentially that rough patch in the season, and maybe even the whole rest of the season. I'm not saying immediately from this point, but it could be where, you know, you start to have that learning curve, and eventually those growing pains are going to pay off. But after this hot start, you're not expecting, or you kind of know that those tough times are going to come with these young players, but you almost don't want to see it right now. And you know what? I don't blame you. Enjoy the early start, the hot start. Islanders 4-0, Devils 3-1, and really that was a huge game with Washington last night, because now both the Devils and the Capitals are tied 6 points apiece, sitting in second place. But let's stick in the division and move on to another team, the New York Rangers.
Yes, the Rangers.
I know you love the Rangers.
I have no comment on that. The Rangers. So they had a big win last night. I think that after losing the Stanley Cup, they definitely took some time to work on certain things. And my opinion is they didn't play badly in the Stanley Cup. I don't believe that they played badly. I believe that the Kings had more experience in the situation, and they played a little bit more strategically. And if you look back on the Stanley Cup games, the Rangers didn't get blown out. They held their own, and the majority of those Stanley Cup games were pushed into OT, if not double OT. So I feel that the Rangers, at this point in time, are growing, and they're trying to figure out where those letdowns were. And at this point, you know, as I said, they had a great win yesterday. I feel like they're going to feed off of this and kind of snowball it from there.
I agree with you. I think another thing you had to look at in the Rangers Stanley Cup matchup with the LA Kings is that the Western Conference is just so much more competitive and has so many more elite teams that just getting to the Stanley Cup Finals through the Western Conference means that you've been through a few battles, and the Kings were certainly battle tested, having to come back from their, I think, 3-1 deficit against the San Jose Sharks, and then having to come back also against the Chicago Blackhawks, the defending Stanley Cup champions. So I think that just the Western Conference has so many more tough teams that the Kings, they never were afraid of the moment. Whereas, I'm not saying the Rangers were. I think they played great in the Stanley Cup. It was just the Kings were not fazed by anything. Once they went through the 3 rounds in the Western Conference playoffs, nothing that the Rangers could do would faze them any more than what they had already seen. And so I think a great job by the Rangers with first-year head coach Alain Vigneault last year, absolutely doing a great job leading them to the Stanley Cup, really to the Stanley Cup Finals. It looked like they had a good chance of getting there 2 years ago when I believe they were the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference, and John Tortorella couldn't get them there. They lost to the Devils in the Eastern Conference Finals. So I think Vigneault has really set up a winning culture in New York, and I expect the Rangers to continue to be good and really compete for the Eastern Conference championship, at least for the next few years.
I can agree with that. I just found something very funny, actually. While you were talking, I was thinking, and you're talking about how the Western Conference, kind of battle-tested the LA Kings. Well, have you ever heard of the original 6? Yes, right?
Yes.
Obviously, if you're a hockey fan, you have to have heard of the original 6. Well, if you don't know what it is, it's the 6 teams that were that made up the hockey league in the first 25 seasons. So from, I believe it was 1942 to 1943. You can correct me if I'm wrong. And then I believe in 1967 they expanded. But anyway, the original 6 were Boston Bruins, the Chicago Blackhawks, the Detroit Red Wings, the Montreal Canadiens, the New York Rangers, and the Toronto Maple Leafs. So, you were talking about how the Western Conference has battle-tested pretty much everyone, but if you notice, all of those teams are in the Eastern Conference. So why do you think that is? You have the original 6 in the Eastern Conference. They've had more experience. They've had more time. So do you think it's just it escalated and it kind of developed in that way over to the Western Conference? Or, I don't know. It's just kind of some food for thought. I just thought it was a very interesting, I guess, little tidbit of information.
That is interesting to point out, but I think that teams' histories don't really factor into the current team and the current conferences. I mean, if you look at any...
Oh, no, I'm not saying that it was. I just thought it was interesting.
Oh, no, it certainly is that you have the more historic hockey teams with all the rich tradition, and yet now it's more of these upstart teams that are the ones that are leading the pack in the current NHL. That I hadn't thought about it that way, but it's kind of like the teams in the Western Conference that, such as the LA Kings, who 2 years ago when they won their first Stanley Cup, it was the first time that they had ever been there. So they were just starting their really historic history book of championships and everything like that. And it almost seems like now the newer teams are saying, the original 6 and all those teams from back at the start of the NHL, you guys had your time, and now we have to create our own history. That's a very insightful way to look at it. Quickly, just one more thing before we wrap this segment up. I did say that we would get to the Montreal Canadiens a little later, And, well, it's time to talk some Canadians. The Habs, 8 points tied with the Islanders for the lead in the Eastern Conference. They're a team with a lot of history, so you can kind of discount what I was just saying there. But I look to them to I don't want to say be the team to beat in the Eastern Conference, but I would expect them to be definitely a favorite to win the Eastern Conference this year.
Based on, we're talking about Montreal right now?
Yes.
Based on their playoff run last year, I can definitely agree with that. I like Montreal. I like the way they play. They're very conservative, but when they have to be, they can get the job done. I feel as if they're a very down-to-business team. They have what they need to be done, and they get it done. But with that being said, I'm going to leave you with a quote from the Islanders captain, John Tavares, after their shootout win against the Sharks yesterday. He said, 4-0 is nice, but you try to focus one day at a time. We have a long way to go. So even though they are tied now, they're up for the challenge.
That's an interesting point, and you have to take it one day at a time, one game at a time, and that's why it's way too early to lock in absolutely what's going to happen, and we know everyone's season is telegraphed and everything, so a long way to go in the NHL season, but very interesting first couple of games so far in the National Hockey League. We will take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll maybe discuss some baseball. We've got the playoffs in high gear there, and then later in the show, stick around to jump on to some football talk. We'll be taking a quick break.
RotoExperts.com is your home for the latest fantasy news and updates. Get fantasy advice from the experts in fantasy football, baseball, basketball, hockey, NASCAR, and even golf. If you have a